Deep in the heart of a tangled rainforest, there lived a young snake named Slitherton, who yearned for something more than simply lounging around in the sun, flicking his tongue at the occasional fly. He had big dreams, you see. He wanted to spread harmony, flexibility, and inner peace to all the creatures of the jungle. And what better way to do this than by teaching yoga? Slitherton had heard tales of peaceful mats, gentle breathing, and meditative stretch. The concept seemed so appealing: calm bodies, relaxed minds, and a chance to stand out in his serpentine community. Most snakes were known for their cunning or for their ability to coil around branches in the shade, but Slitherton envisioned a snake that brought mindfulness and serenity to every living thing. He had also heard about the fancy pants and water bottles that came with yoga, though that part was more an idle curiosity since black mambas and cobras didn't usually wear pants or carry water bottles for that matter. Deciding that enough was enough, Slitherton slithered off to an enlightenment workshop that was rumored to take place near a croaking frog's swamp. This workshop was run by a wise old tortoise named Tiberius, who had traveled far and wide, practicing yoga for decades. Tiberius famously claimed to have performed the elusive inverted turtle posture, though he only demonstrated it once every 5 years, on a day marked by the rare alignment of 3 shooting stars. Slitherton had a hunch that this workshop would be the first step toward fulfilling his dream. Even though he'd never actually tried yoga, how hard could it be? You just stretch, breathe deeply, and maybe hum a bit, right? The day of the workshop arrived and Slitherton slithered into the clearing, coiling up neatly next to a mongoose wearing spandex and a bamboo lemur nervously fiddling with a yoga strap. Tiberius the tortoise spoke in a voice heavy with age and wisdom. He encouraged everyone to tap into their natural instincts, to let nature guide their movements. Slitherton was enthralled. As Tiberius moved into the first pose, the sleeping lotus, Slitherton realized with creeping dread that he had absolutely no limbs, no knees, and no hips. Everyone around him began folding and bending in ways that seemed anatomically impossible for a snake. Slitherton tried to coil into some semblance of the pose but ended up looking more like a toddler's scribble than a graceful lotus. Letting out an embarrassed hiss, he tried to imagine himself as a serene extension of the earth. Perhaps if he focused on his breath, it had all fallen into place. However, focusing on his breath simply reminded him how fast and panicky it was becoming. He was already second-guessing his choice of hobby, but he also felt a flicker of determination. Once something slid into his mind, it was tough to let go. Over the next few weeks, Slitherton started practicing in private. He woke up, well, not really standing up, but raising his head at dawn to slither onto a large boulder by a gentle stream. There he tried to emulate the classic poses he'd read about in Tiberius's yoga guide: downward dog, warrior pose, and the iconic sun salutation. Every day, Slitherton discovered new challenges. He'd attempt downward dog, but realized that as a snake, his entire body was parallel to the ground in the first place. So instead, he curled his neck, imagining the graceful arch of a dog's back. Somehow, he ended up toppling off the boulder into the stream below. Once, he tried the tree pose before recalling that the tree pose relied on balancing on one foot. He tried to coil his tail into a sort of trunk shape, but the resulting tangle had him stuck in a personal knotted conundrum for half an hour. Still, slowly and with more patience than he ever thought possible, he started carving out his own versions of these poses. Encouraged by small victories like keeping his torso balanced on the boulder for more than 10 seconds, Slitherton decided to take the ultimate leap. He would host his own yoga class. After all, the rainforest was teeming with creatures eager for relaxation. The local toucan complained daily of a stiff beak, while the honey badgers, who always seemed extremely irritable, might benefit from a weekly meditation session. And rumor had it that the tigers of the eastern clearing needed a new cross-training routine. Slitherton optimistically draped some vines into a canopy for shade, placed smooth pebbles in a circle for a zen vibe, and pinned up a sign that read, "Slitherton Yoga for a more flexible you." The class was free, at least initially, so that he could impress them with his swirling knowledge of yoga moves. On the morning of the first class, the clearing was abuzz. Or perhaps it was just the swarm of mosquitoes hovering nearby, but Slitherton chose to interpret it as excitement. A gaggle of monkeys arrived, chattering excitedly. A few obstinate warthogs ambled in, looking skeptical but curious. Tiberius himself arrived a bit late naturally. He was slow, but offered Slitherton a nod of support. The snake's tongue flickered with nerves. Would they notice that he hadn't quite mastered the standard poses? That his workaround for having no arms and legs might look more like interpretive dance than yoga? He decided to be bold, standing well. Once again, standing had a different meaning for a snake at the front of the group. Slitherton welcomed everyone and began with a breathing exercise. Inhale, hiss, exhale, hiss. A parrot in the back repeated hiss, hiss, which caused a burst of laughter from a pair of hyenas. Not exactly the calm vibe he was going for, but he pressed on. He demonstrated what he called the sinuous sunrise, a personal adaptation of the sun salutation by stretching his head skyward and swaying slowly from side to side. The group tried to follow along, though the giraffe among them had to crane his neck carefully so as not to poke through the canopy. The monkeys, agile as always, simply improvised comedic twists, hooking their tails around branches. The honey badgers grumbled at first, but one old badger actually admitted that the movement alleviated a persistent crick in his back, and that was enough for Slitherton to feel a victory dance in his heart. Although comedic mishaps were inevitable, like the warthogs knocking one another over when they attempted a half-pigeon pose, there was a sense of camaraderie building. Then came Slitherton's attempt at warrior pose. He coiled, trying to replicate the strength and poise the posture demanded. Unfortunately, it came out resembling a pretzel that had been left in a hot car. A donkey brayed in delight, and the monkeys fell off their mats, hooting and hollering. In the midst of the chaos, Tiberius quietly demonstrated the correct warrior pose and gently motioned for Slitherton to try again. Realizing he had to adapt, Slitherton turned his tail upright, impressed with his own cunning. He imagined each coil representing a limb in perfect extension, but from the outside it looked more like he was tying himself in knots. Within seconds, he lost his balance. Except a snake in yoga losing balance doesn't simply stumble. He flopped sideways, causing a chain reaction in which a barrel-chested boar toppled over onto a family of porcupines, who then squealed and jumped, releasing a flurry of quills. The monkeys shrieked as they dove for cover. Tiberius tried to hold his position, but found a quill precariously lodged in his shell. In one swift turn, Slitherton's dream clash became an impromptu comedic fiasco. Feeling mortified, the snake wanted to disappear into the undergrowth. Yet, as he started apologizing in an endless hiss, "Sorry, sorry," some of the animals, especially the chimpanzees, applauded. They found the spectacle hilarious and oddly charming. A few of them were actually having fun. Determined to make amends, Slitherton called for a brief intermission. He slithered over to Tiberius, extracting the quill with as much gentleness as possible, then carefully checked on the porcupines. Thankfully, no one was seriously injured, but a few warthogs had bruised egos. The donkey offered them a comedic pat on the back with his hoof, and thanks to a bit of comedic timing, tensions dissolved, replaced by laughter and the occasional grunt of amusement. The class resumed with a slower, gentler approach. Slitherton decided to improvisationally rename certain poses to suit his own limitations, hoping the animals would find a sense of fun and acceptance in these new forms. That's how downward-facing dog became downward-facing asp, complete with a thorough coil around oneself. Instead of child's pose, he offered hatchling's huddle, encouraging everyone to gently rest their foreheads on the ground, or snout or beak. He discovered that the donkey's especially long face made a perfect hinge for this position, causing the donkey to chuckle out loud. In the days that followed, word spread throughout the rainforest. Slitherton's yoga classes were unconventional, but they certainly weren't boring. Critters from all corners of the jungle started showing up to see this determined snake who had an impossibly positive attitude despite having no arms, no legs, and nearly tangling himself into knots whenever he tried to demonstrate a pose. Parrots screeched overhead, repeating in Bre'ith and Banu, Bre'ith wood, in slightly mocking echoes that made the classes even more amusing. The mosquitoes, usually a nuisance, took to perching on large leaves, forming an impromptu choir for these comedic gatherings. There was something delightfully ridiculous about a snake teaching yoga. Even Tiberius, who had once been the prime guru of the jungle, fascinated by the unique approach Slitherton had developed. Things took a bizarre turn when the rumor drifted beyond the rainforest to the farmland on the outskirts, drawing a few adventurous visitors from the nearest town. Among them was Harriet, a woman who adored nature and had once won a small yoga competition at her local community center. Eager for a challenge and a good story, Harriet ventured into the rainforest in search of this serpent yogi she'd heard about. She was entirely unprepared for what she found. Wild animals of every stripe, dot, shell, and scale, all attempting to twist themselves into improbable shapes under the guidance of a seemingly enthusiastic snake. Accepting an honorary vine mat, large leaf to sit on, more precisely, Harriet joined the session to see if Slitherton had any real merit. The second she attempted Hatchling's huddle, a curious tapir waddled over to sniff her hair. She almost squealed but suppressed the impulse, focusing on her breath. After all, she was here to push her boundaries. To Harriet's surprise and mild alarm, Slitherton's method was not about perfect alignment, but about openness, creativity, and acceptance of one's body. She saw warthogs with knees that bent awkwardly, but still found a modicum of stability. She observed a flamboyance of flamingos who perched delicately on one leg, though occasionally they'd lose balance and topple into each other. Through it all, Slitherton slithered around the class, offering gentle hisses of encouragement. Interestingly, the fact that Slitherton couldn't demonstrate each pose with textbook perfection made him more approachable. No one felt self-conscious about their limitations because, well, the teacher was a snake. If he could adapt, so could they. Harriet found herself bursting into giggles more often than not, yet she also noticed waves of tranquility washing over the group. The collective laughter seemed to ease everyone's tension, and Harriet found that her spine melted into deeper relaxation than she'd experienced in months. Of course, no comedic adventure runs smoothly forever. Word had it that a rival yoga teacher, a pompous she-lizard named Lucinda Lizardworth, was deeply outraged that this foolish serpent with no limbs was siphoning off her clientele. Lucinda prided herself on graceful poses and pristine technique, delivered with a haughty flick of her scaly tail. Seeing Slitherton become a local celebrity made her scales crawl. She marched into the next session, tail held high, piercing eyes glowering at the unsuspecting teacher and his ragtag group of students. She declared loudly, "You call this yoga? Look at you. You can't even do the tree pose, let alone an advanced Ashtanga series. You're a mockery to the craft." A hush fell over the clearing. A few mice under her foot squeaked in alarm, scurrying away. This was a showdown flexibility warfare in the heart of the rainforest. Slitherton swallowed a lump in his throat. He had faced many comedic mishaps, but outright confrontation was new to him. The group of animals bristled, some stepping protectively in front of Slitherton. Even Harriet felt a surge of solidarity as she rose from her vine mat. Lucinda sneered, unimpressed. "Well, if you're truly a yoga teacher, let's see you demonstrate the coiled cobra pose. Properly," she challenged, crossing her arms. Slitherton hesitated, feeling a pang of irony. The cobra pose was meant to be easy for a snake, right? But lucidity struck him despite being physically a snake. The standard cobra pose typically involves arms pressing the torso upward. He had no arms, so how was he supposed to do that? He'd tried a variation in private before, but it ended up resembling a limp bit of rope. Lucinda Lizardworth tapped her foot, looking smug. A few of her minions, various smaller reptiles, snickered behind her. Still, Slitherton remembered Tiberius's teachings: adapt the pose to your body, not your body to the pose. With a steadying breath, Slitherton slithered onto a flat rock in the center of the circle. He slowly lifted his head and the front portion of his body, curving upward in what he hoped was a dignified arch. Then he stretched as far as his vertebrae would allow, feeling each scale move in synergy with the next. He may not have had arms, but he could lift his torso in a way that accentuated a graceful line from head to tail. The clearing grew quiet as the group watched Slitherton hold this position, breathing calmly, smoothly, embracing the simplest version of the pose. It wasn't the textbook cobra described, but it was an authentic serpent's version. After a long moment, Slitherton exhaled slowly, lowered himself, and glanced out at his students. A hush reigned among the animals. Then, softly at first, but gathering strength, applause and cheers erupted across the clearing. Tiberius stamped his heavy tortoise foot in admiration, Harriet clapped, and the monkeys whooped in delight. Even Lucinda's minions seemed impressed. Some offered polite snaps of their claws. Lucinda, not used to being outshone, tried to recover. She flared her throat, attempting a complicated scaly posture that involved balancing on her tail while arching backward. It was impressive at first, until a certain mosquito choir started humming around her, making her twitch and lose concentration. She toppled forward, face planting into the grass. The clearing erupted into laughter, not cruel, but certainly amused. Lucinda rose, eyes aflame with embarrassment. Without another word, she whipped her tail around and stormed out, followed by her cadre of uneasy onlookers. The animals around Slitherton cheered in victory, not so much over Lucinda, but for Slitherton's triumphant stand for acceptance and creativity within yoga. In the aftermath, Harriet approached Slitherton and gave him a gentle pat on his head, one of the few ways to congratulate a snake. She confessed that his class might have seemed unorthodox, but it had done wonders for her. She'd found laughs and peace here that she'd never experienced in more formal yoga studios. Tiberius commended Slitherton on his resilience, remarking that true yoga wasn't about perfect form, but about union, the harmony between breath, spirit, and the acceptance of our unique bodies. The animals gathered around, forming a ring of respect and celebration. Slitherton could hardly believe his success. He realized that his mission to bring flexible, mindful energy to the rainforest, regardless of his serpentine limitations, was working better than he'd ever imagined. After Lucinda's dramatic exit, more animals than ever flocked to Slitherton's classes, drawn by curiosity and the promise of a lighthearted but fulfilling experience. Even those who were initially skeptical found themselves charmed by the camaraderie. Eventually, a curious group of armadillos arrived, rolling into class like little armored basketballs, wanting to test their shell's flexibility. The monkeys found a new pastime in renaming poses that better fit the setting. Stork pose became heron by the waterfall, and seated forward fold was rebranded as leaf curling caterpillar. Everyone embraced the practice with a sense of playfulness, and laughter became as much a part of the session as the mindful breathing. As time passed, Slitherton continued refining his teaching style. Whereas Tiberius specialized in slow, measured movements to accommodate his tortoise shell, Slitherton explored dynamic flows. As dynamic as a limbless creature could manage, anyway, he'd demonstrate a fluid wave of the spine, encouraging his students to follow with their own body segments, be they limbs, hooves, or wings. The warthogs found a surprising grace in these motions, feeling less like heavyset brutes and more like fluid mammals. The monkeys discovered that matching Slitherton's coil-like transitions challenged them to slow down, an unfamiliar concept to their hyperactive minds. One afternoon, while the entire group was in the middle of a mass, sinuous sunrise, Harriet began to cry happy tears, rolling down her cheeks. The group paused, worried something was wrong. Between sniffles, she explained that she'd never felt so released from her daily stresses, so unburdened by perfectionism. Practicing yoga with an actual snake who had to think outside the box showed her that anything could be adapted, that there was no single right way to care for one's body and soul. Hearing this, Slitherton felt his heart, or the snake equivalent thereof, swell. He'd never believed that yoga was about complicated postures and intimidating acrobatics. For him, it was about trying your best, accepting what your best looked like on that particular day, and having a sense of humor when it inevitably went sideways. Over time, the creature community found balance in each other's presence. Rivalries between warthogs and lemurs were soothed by shared breathing exercises, and monkeys guided tigers through gentle twists, all for the sake of relaxation. Tiberius occasionally taught advanced workshops on the side, seamlessly complementing Slitherton's comedic style with old-world wisdom. Harriet integrated rainforest moves into her own routine back home, eventually inviting her human friends to experience this serpentine yoga phenomenon. Though many were skeptical at first, a snake yoga teacher? Sounds bananas. They were soon won over, discovering that smiles and open minds were the best accessories. In time, Slitherton's clearing became a place of pilgrimage, where all species and even some curious tourists could come together, breathe, and laugh. He might never grow arms or legs, and he might never master a perfect half-moon pose. But from a certain point of view, Slitherton had achieved more than any posture could promise. He'd fostered an environment where acceptance, humor, and creativity thrived. Even Lucinda Lizardworth, after licking her wounds for a few weeks, grudgingly admitted she'd been too rigid and occasionally allowed her spies to visit Slitherton's classes to take notes on his warm, welcoming style. So, the rainforest echoed with contented sighs and occasional shouts of delight as creatures large and small stretched, coiled, and contorted themselves around a benevolent snake who never took himself or the practice too seriously. Slitherton's story became legendary not for impeccable technique, but for the joy and unity he brought to every living thing around him. As he liked to say, with a cheeky flick of his tongue at the end of each class, "Thank you for letting this snake teach you how to stretch. If I can do it, quite literally anyone can." And with that, a new kind of tranquility and delightful anarchy settled over the rainforest, ensuring that yoga would never be quite the same again.